Okay. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University, where the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project is based. I want to welcome all of you to our second event of the 2025-2026 academic year and our 60th event total. So today we have Professor Ranjoo Herr giving a talk titled Confucian Gender Equality. And we have a really nice lineup of scholars to discuss with Professor Herr. We have invited Professor Minjun Yo from Zhejiang University, Professor Xin Yi Chen from the University of Vermont, and Professor Stephen Engel from Wesleyan University to give responses before we open the screen to everyone in the audience. Today, our chair is Wendy Zhongshu from the University of Macau. It has become a tradition here at 四海为学 to give younger scholars a chance to be part of high-profile academic events by inviting them to take part as chairs or discussants. So if there's any younger scholars in the audience who wish to be part of future events, please email me. This event today will be 90 minutes or an hour and a half, and will end promptly at 10:30 Beijing time. Before getting things started and handing them over to Wendy, I just want to say a few things about the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Academic Forum. The 四海为学 project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive conventional practices sometimes seen in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism or self-promotion. We hope to curb all types of aggressive and "look at me, I'm smarter than you," or "don't I know so much," and similar attitudes sometimes found in academic exchanges. We might even go so far as to say that we hope to be somewhat of a counterbalance for the negative attitudes sometimes found in blind reviews. While there is certainly a time and a place for anonymity, or at least the appearance of anonymity, communication in academia should also have a time and a place for speaking to one another in more congenial and community-forming settings. The neologism 四海为学, which was created by Robin Wong, is a play on 四海为家, and we hope to keep this idea of 四海为家 at the foreground of all of our events. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project seeks to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchanges by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where people truly learn from and with one another. So before introducing our chair, I just want to once again thank all of the professors here for being with us and for having a conversation today. Our chair is Wendy Zhongshu. She is a PhD student from the University of Macau. Her research interests center on the comparative philosophy of Taoism and feminism with a focus on the Laozi and the Zhuangzi. A focal point of her current work involves a comparative study of the conception of self in the Zhuangzi and the feminist adaptation of Taoist thought when formulating ideas of self and identity. We're very happy to have you here, Wendy. The screen is yours. Oh, you're muted still, Wendy.
Thank you, Professor. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event today. Today, we're happy to have Professor Ranjoo Herr to give us a lecture titled The Confucian Gender Equality. After the lecture, three commentators will give their remarks. So first, I will introduce our speaker today. Dr. Ranjoo Herr is a professor of philosophy at Bentley University, MA, USA. Her primary research areas are in feminist theory, third world, transnational, and decolonial feminisms, and comparative Confucian philosophy. She has over 30 peer-reviewed publications, and her published works have appeared in various peer-reviewed journals and anthologies. Professor Herr, please feel free to start your talk.
Thank you so much. I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm very pleased to be here. So the title of my talk is Confucian Feminism and Gender Equality, and this is based on a chapter of my monograph that I'm working on of the same title. And as I present my paper, I apologize in advance that I won't be putting others' phrases in quotation marks for the sake of the fluidity of presentation. So, yes, I like to start this conversation with the question, is Confucian feminism possible? The reason is when I share with other people that currently I'm working on Confucian feminism, that's often the question that I get from people. And this is understandable given Confucianism's historical patriarchy, which has been pretty bad. Yet, for those of us who have been working on the intersection of Confucianism and feminism, there is actually a vibrant debate on Confucian feminism regarding, in particular, Chen Yang Li's Confucian care ethics. Currently, you could say that Confucian care ethics is the dominant position on Confucian feminism. This presentation, however, is not on Confucian care ethics. While I appreciate that the debate on Confucian care ethics has generated much interest in the topic of Confucian feminism, excuse me, Confucian care ethics feminist pedigree, I believe, is predicated on Confucianism's tenuous connection to a branch of Western feminism, care ethics. I have argued elsewhere why this is the case, but I won't be discussing it here today. Since I believe, though, that any theory that can claim to be Confucian feminism should be predicated on feminist resources within Confucianism, my aim here is to construct a conception of Confucian feminism based on an idea of gender equality compatible with Confucianism. And I call this Confucian Gender Equality. So my argument is that Confucian gender equality as a subset of Confucian moral equality is constitutive of the Confucian philosophical system itself. And so my presentation is going to proceed as follows. The first section explicates and defends Confucian moral equality, which grounds Confucian gender equality. Next, I offer evidence that Confucian gender equality is constitutive of the Confucian philosophical system by examining the writings of 4 pre-modern Confucian theorists that I call Confucian feminists. And they are Ming Empress Ren Xiaowen, Ming Confucian theorist Li Zhe, and 2 Joseon female Confucian theorists, Im Yunji-dang and Kang Jung-il-dang. I characterize them as Confucian feminists, but they endorsed women's virtues such as obedience, submissiveness, docility, and compliance. Some may be skeptical that they can be feminists for this reason. To respond to the critique that those who accept women's virtues cannot be considered feminist, I first explore how such virtues were justified in Confucianism before defending my Confucian feminism. So, Section 1, Confucian moral equality. Confucianism is known for endorsing strict social hierarchy. Yet, the Confucian 4 books contain passages that affirm an idea of equality among Confucian persons. For example, Mengzi in 6a.6 and 6a.7 famously stated that the heart-mind which contains the seeds of moral virtues, is common to all humanity, sages and ordinary humans alike. In the Mencia 6b.15, the legendary sage Emperor Shun is said to have been a peasant originally who arose from the plowed fields. Hence, according to Mencia 6b.2, all persons can become a Yao or a Shun if they apply themselves diligently in self-cultivation to realize their moral self. In addition, Confucianism is committed to the equality of opportunity, particularly for education. So I refer to this as Confucian moral equality that assumes Confucian persons' equal moral potential to approximate the Confucian ideal of the Junzi. While most Confucians recognize that an idea of moral equality is inherent in Confucianism, they disagree about its significance in Confucianism. Some argue for its centrality, including myself in 2010, while others downplay its significance. Since I want to argue for its centrality, let me examine arguments for the second view. Those who deny the centrality of moral equality in Confucianism invoke Donald Munro's natural equality in reference to this idea. In 1969, Munro stated that the idea of natural equality in ancient China is descriptive, referring to the fact that humans are born with common attributes or characteristics. It has been claimed that this notion of equality is distinct from evaluative equality, which endows humans with similar worth. They further argue that Munro's characterization of this equality as descriptive is evidence that it is not central in Confucianism. Chenyang Li in 1999, for example, asserts that Confucianism's ideal of the Junzi and its inherent paternalism results in the lack of equality in Confucianism. In his more recent work in 2012, Li clarifies that although the idea of equality is compatible with Confucianism, Confucianism's main notion of equality is proportional equality, which he defines as supporting the belief that an orderly and functional society must be one with effective higher and lower, or superior and inferior, as well as the proper stratification and ranking between the two. She further argues that Confucianism should not be interpreted to support equality as an ultimate value with religious or metaphysical foundations. Li's and Tan's skepticism about the centrality of Confucian moral equality is ultimately based on the correct notion that the Confucian moral ideal of the Junzi justifies social hierarchy. Becoming a Junzi is an extremely arduous lifelong process, and only a small minority may consistently pursue this path and be worthy of the honorific title Junzi. Hence, Li correctly points out that while everyone has the potential to make oneself a Junzi, in practice, because people are at different stages of this process, they are not on the same footing. This divergence is then used as a justification for social hierarchy in which the Junzi has not only moral authority, but also political authority, as governing is a proper domain for the Junzi. I argue, however, that when Confucian hierarchy is clarified in this way, not only is it compatible with Confucian moral equality, but rather presupposes it. To see this, it is imperative to clearly understand what Confucian moral equality means. And I believe Stephen Darwell's distinction between appraisal respect and recognition respect that he discussed in 1977 may help to elucidate. The objects of appraisal respect, on the one hand, are persons who manifest their excellence as persons, or some exemplary feature of their engagement in some specific pursuit. This is consistent with the Confucian emphasis on giving the Junzi the special regard that they deserve. Darwell's recognition respect, on the other hand, is owed to all persons, which is to give proper weight to the fact that they are persons in one's deliberation and to act accordingly. In other words, it is to let certain facts about others, namely that they are persons with equal moral potential to become a Junzi, to place restrictions on what it is permissible for one to do. Confucian moral equality, then, is recognition respect. It is not vacuous because it is not saying that humans are all generally the same. Rather, its focus is specific to their moral potential. Further, Confucian moral equality does not entail treating people indiscriminately without consideration to individual circumstances, as Li asserts. Rather, treating Confucian persons as equals in their moral potential grounds their equal worth or dignity and entails prohibition of certain forms of mistreatment of others that are incompatible with recognizing their equal dignity. This implies different things from different people. From ordinary persons' perspective, this means that they should not mistreat others by, for example, harming, robbing, or murdering them. From the perspective of would-be rulers, this means that they should refrain from domination or oppression or exploitation and rule in such a way to maximize others' opportunities for self-cultivation. For example, by offering universal education or minimum economic security or basic health care. In other words, Confucian moral equality is fundamental to the ideal Confucian politics of Ren and the political principle of Shuji Ren. This is what ultimately justifies the Junzi's moral and political authority over others. Hence, violating Confucian moral equality would corrode the very justification for Confucian's social hierarchy. The centrality of Confucian moral equality has been acknowledged even by Monroe himself, who, contrary to Li's and Ten's claims, recognized the significance of an evaluative conception of equality as equality of worth, in not only in Zushi, but even in the Mencius. Contrary to Ten's claim, Confucian moral equality does not need to presuppose any religious or metaphysical foundations. The notion that moral equality presupposes religious or metaphysical assumptions comes from a prevalent, but I believe, mistaken notion that the idea of equality is of European provenance. The story goes that this idea originated in early New Testament Christianity and was further developed in the 17th century European traditions of natural law and social contract theory, still bearing the stamp of Christianity. Even the European egalitarian tradition, however, goes through secularization, as it was incorporated into seminal modern legal documents, such as the 1776 American Declaration of Independence, the 1789 French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, and finally, the UN's 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This last document is an explicitly secular document, which prides itself on relying on no metaphysical or religious foundation, but only on common humanity shared by all human beings on the planet. This Eurocentric account, however, completely elides the Confucian idea of moral equality in the Confucian Four Books, dating back to the 4th century BCE, which was not justified by religious or metaphysical ideas of Western origin. References to heaven or heaven's mandate in the Four Books might lead some to attribute religious assumptions to Confucianism. Philip Ivanhoe, in 2007, argues that heaven for Gongzi and Mengzi is a concerned agent and a force for human good. Yet, it is impersonal and lacks a distinct personality, unlike the anthropocentric deity in Western religions. Indeed, when it comes to Mengzi, following heaven's way is nothing other than realizing human nature common to all humanity, because it is heaven that endowed us with the natural tendency and taste for morality. Hence, Irene Bloom in 1998 states that Mengzi subscribes to a biological, familial, and social view of human nature in offering the most minimal claims about an ultimate source for Confucian moral equality. She refers to this as metaphysical weightlessness of Mengzi's view. This aligns with Monroe's characterization of Confucian moral equality in the Mencius as merely descriptive. Basing Confucian moral equality on ethical biological traits, however, should not be interpreted as devoid of normativity that confers on Confucian persons equal dignity that is due recognition respect. If my foregoing analysis is plausible, then Confucian moral equality is the foundation on which the entire Confucian moral edifice stands. Granted that only few are actually able to approximate the ideal of the Junzi, one cannot know in advance which few would do so. Hence, it is important to throw the net as widely as possible and offer the opportunities for Confucian self-cultivation to as many as possible. A potential Junzi may be among the most disadvantaged and disdained groups in society, much like Gongzi's favorite disciple, Yan Hui. If Confucian moral equality is to be taken seriously, then assisting those with the potential to become a Junzi realize their potential is an authentically Confucian goal, as seems implied by the master's commitment to the equality of educational opportunity, or the political principle of Shuzi Zuren, or economic reforms. If this is the case, then Confucianism is in principle compatible with comprehensive structural reforms of society to minimize structural obstacles to individuals pursuing self-cultivation. Unfortunately, historical Confucianism, once established, did not endorse comprehensive structural reforms of society, which resulted in what Steve Engel called critical gaps. In some cases, it actively rationalized structural oppression that forfeited opportunities for self-cultivation for many, most notoriously women. So I'm going to move to the second section now, Confucian Gender Equality. I take Confucian gender equality to be equality between women and men in their moral potential to approximate the Confucian moral ideal of the Junzi. Confucian gender equality is, I believe, a subset of Confucian moral equality, which I have argued is fundamental to Confucianism. Confucian gender equality undergirds my conception of Confucian feminism. In other words, in my conception of Confucian feminism, anyone who accepts Confucian gender equality is Confucian feminist. I argue that Confucian feminism, predicated on Confucian gender equality, is constitutive of the Confucian philosophical system. The evidence is to be found in the writings of 4 pre-modern Confucian theorists or Confucian feminists. So, Ming Empress Ren Xiaowen, Ming Confucian scholar Li Zhe, and 2 female Joseon scholars, Im Yunjidang and Kang Jongil-dang. So I'm going to examine each of these theorists now. Empress Ren Xiaowen of the Ming Dynasty authored the Teachings for the Inner Court, which will be abbreviated as the Teachings, in 1405. The Teachings aims to instruct young women in the imperial inner court to cultivate their character and manage their behavior. This was included among the Wang Xiang's 4 books for women in the late Ming. This has been translated by Anne Peng White in 2017, and I have benefited from this translation. The teaching has been regarded as the most comprehensive and philosophical work among the 4 books for women. Most importantly, Ren Xiaowen explicitly refers to cardinal Confucian virtues in the Analects, such as humaneness, rightness, and ritual propriety, as applicable to women as much as to men. She assumes that women and men have the same nature and are equally capable of self-cultivation. In other words, she believed that women can be sages too. Ren Xiaowen upholds the mentioned premise that virtuous nature is endowed in us originally for both men and women, although we end up different due to our habits. Women, just as men, are capable of cultivating cardinal Confucian virtues, and this is why they can become partners of gentlemen in accomplishing their teachings. Ren Xiaowen insists that women must exemplify the virtue of filial piety as well, as it is part of heavenly endowed nature. Yet, for a married woman, she emphasized that this should be towards her parents-in-law, who are to be revered as heaven and earth. A more radical version of Confucian feminism, predicated on Confucian gender equality, can be found in the work of the Ming Confucian philosopher Li Zhe, who is also known as the Confucian iconoclast. Although Li Zhe's views on gender come in bits and pieces, as a philosopher, Li's view of gender relations presupposed a deeper philosophical foundation, which includes cosmology. The yin-yang binary is compatible with 2 interpretations, One is complementary and the other is hierarchical. Li rejected the hierarchical conception of yin-yang and viewed the production process of the universe as cooperative, springing forth from a relationship between pairs such as yin and yang, woman and man, and wife and husband. According to this binary model, the birth of everything in the universe arises due to the interplay of pairs, and human life can be created only when there are man and woman. Li's conception of the yin-yang cosmology undergirded his critique of the traditional gender relation based on difference and hierarchy. Li reconceptualized the gender relation as a relationship between friends. Li argued for a complementary relationship between the pairs of yang and yin, qian and kun, husband and wife, and man and woman. Li made a case for men and women's innate capacities being identical by analogizing to their capacities for vision. Li discussed historical and contemporary examples of women who in fact were just like men in their intellectual and spiritual capacities and called them real men or better than men. Deploring the increasingly strict restriction of women in the inner quarters in his own time, Li identified the cause of many women's inferior intellectual and moral capacities as their social sequestering. He stated, "One cannot stop at the observation that women's vision is short-sighted. To say that short-sightedness and far-sightedness exist is acceptable. But to say that a man's vision is entirely far-sighted and a woman's vision is wholly short-sighted, once again, how can that be acceptable?" He argued that the reason that many women are short-sighted is that they are confined within the walls of the inner chambers, unable to develop their capacities and talents. He then imagined a person with a woman's body and a man's insight that Confucius wandered throughout the world in search of, pointing out the grievous wrong in depriving opportunities for self-cultivation of such a woman. Li lamented that the sight of such a woman would put men who claim women's short-sightedness to shame and remorse. Over 100 years later, in a different Confucian state, the Joseon dynasty on the Korean peninsula, we encounter a set of female Confucian philosophers, Im Yunjidang and Kang Jeongil-dang. They wholeheartedly embraced Confucian values and ideals and tried to embody the Confucian virtues in their daily lives. Living in the late Joseon, Confucianism of these two female philosophers reflects the Neo-Confucian metaphysical inflection following the orthodox school of Zhuxi. According to this line of Neo-Confucianism, the world is unified by the metaphysical principle of Li, pattern or principle. Li manifests itself in everything, including humans. Yet the true essence of human nature has been sullied by bodily desires arising from our material substance of qi. For these Neo-Confucian philosophers, the primary aim of moral self-cultivation is to rid oneself of impurities caused by one's qi and to illuminate one's true nature, Li. The tool used in this process is the Neo-Confucian method involving Jung, understood as reverence, sincerity, reverential attention, by which one can focus on one's inner principle. In this regard, impeccable adherence to propriety is of essential importance, as Neo-Confucianism considered propriety a concrete social manifestation of the principle of Li. By impeccably adhering to propriety, one is able to eradicate selfish desires and preserve the principle within the self. Not only did these two female Confucian scholars accept the Neo-Confucian values and ideas, they did so by embracing Confucian gender equality. This is most clearly articulated in the work of Yun Jidang. Yun Jidang wrote that she earnestly aspires to emulate the sages because, though I am a woman, the original nature is no different between men and women. Although Yun Jidang recognized that the great sages of Yao and Shun in ancient China were superior to ordinary people like herself, she emphasized that the sages are the same in kind as I am regarding the original nature, which is ruled by the principle of Li within each of us. The only difference is in the material substance we receive at birth. The material substance of the sages is clear, whereas that of ordinary people is turbid. The way to retrieve one's original nature is by moral self-cultivation. This requires first distinguishing between the mind of the way, which encompasses the principle of Li, and the human mind, which is swayed by selfish desires. Then, one must strive to make the mind of the way the master, so that the human mind will comply like an obedient servant. Zheng Il-dang, who explicitly recognized Yun Jidang as her mentor, wholeheartedly agreed that originally the nature of all human beings is good, and becoming a sage involves developing one's original nature fully. Section 3, Women's Virtues. All pre-modern Confucian feminists examined in the last section were remarkable in embracing Confucian gender equality. Yet, with the exception of Li Zhe, they also wholeheartedly embraced conventional women's virtues, such as obedience, submissiveness, docility, and compliance. These virtues seem ideological and therefore contradictory to Confucian gender equality. Can those who embrace women's virtues be considered feminist? My conception's answer to this is a yes. Before addressing this question, however, let us examine how women's virtues came to be endorsed in traditional Confucianism. So I'm talking about, how women accepted Confucianism in the pre-modern societies. References to women's virtues appear much earlier in Chinese history. According to Lisa Raffles, a praise of feminine virtues as frailty, reticence, and passivity is found as early as in the Zhejiang. Women's virtues gain prominence, however, with female instruction texts. Wang Xiang's 4 Books for Women offers such examples. Ban Zhao's Admonition for Women is the oldest such publication that still exists. Ban lists gentleness, weakness as women's virtues, stating that they require neither unparalleled talent nor exceeding brilliance. A woman's self-cultivation consists in developing respect to avoid confrontation with the strong, and compliance that involves leniency and generosity. Women's great ritual principle is the way of respect and compliance. Tranquility, unharried composure, chastity, and quietude are important women's virtues. Towards parents-in-law, a woman should express conceding obedience, which is to comply with their demands without arguing with them about their rightness or wrongness. Later female instruction texts echo Ban's list of women's virtues. The Analects for Women stated that women should treat their husband as their head and emphasized tranquility, chastity, and integrity as women's virtues. As we've examined, Ren Xiaowen emphasized chastity, compliance, gentleness, quietude, and even watchfulness as crucial women's virtues. Filial piety is highlighted in the Analects for Women and the teachings for the inner quarter. The two Joseon female Confucian theorists advocated obedience and submissiveness as necessary virtues for Confucian women. So then the question is, given that women's virtues are emphasized time and time again by these pre-modern Confucians, I want to ask the question of how did Confucianism justify women's virtues? Again, we're going back to pre-modern traditional Confucianism. How did that justify women's virtues? Traditionally, an important Chinese idea that rationalized the passivity distinct in women's virtues is the yin-yang polarity. In particular, many scholars point to the Han Confucian Zhongshu's innovative interpretation of the yin-yang polarity as hierarchical, as pivotal in this rationalization. Dong was the first thinker to see human nature in terms of yin and yang. Yang was associated with male, and yin was associated with female, lending support to the prevalent stereotype of women as unreasonable, emotional, and incapable of moral cultivation. This rationalized not only the Confucian presumption of female inferiority, but also that of the need for male domination and control over women. While the hierarchical conception of yin-yang is an important factor in rationalizing women's virtues, I believe a more fundamental source of this distinction, or rather the rationalization of women's virtues, is the traditional Chinese family system itself. This is the agnatic patrilineal and patrilocal family system of Chinese antiquity that Confucian masters inherited and enthusiastically endorsed as fundamental to its philosophical system. The Confucian family consists of two axes: the relation between father and son, or more broadly, parent and child, and the relation between husband and wife, which are two among the 5 human relations crucial to Confucianism. Let us focus here on the husband-wife relation. The significance of the husband-wife relation is inextricably connected in traditional Confucianism to the importance of the parent-child relation, since there must be a heterosexual couple to form a union in which children would be born. Indeed, getting married and having a male heir is considered one of the most important filial duties in Confucianism, according to Mencius 4a.26. What is the proper guiding principle in the husband-wife relation? According to Mencius 3a.4, Mencius identified it as distinction, bie. There are 2 interpretations of distinction. First, in the Book of Rights, this is interpreted as requiring a strict physical separation. According to chapter 12 of the Book of Rights, males and females did not use the same stand or rack for their clothes. The wife did not presume to hang up anything on the pegs of her husband, nor to put anything in his boxes, nor to share his bathing house. Another interpretation is as a functional distinction, as a division of labor, according to Xini Chen 2000. Adherence to Bie implies here that men who occupy the public world ought to focus on affairs pertaining to the outside, such as farming, commerce, and holding government office. And women who occupy the private domestic world ought to focus on affairs pertaining to the household, such as raising children, cooking, weaving, and other household work. Between the two interpretations, Xini Chen argues that distinction in the mentioned context refers to the separation of inner and outer spheres based on function. Raffles, who recognizes that Bie in early pre-Confucian Chinese texts implied physical separation, nevertheless argues that the reality of the gender relation in antiquity diverged considerably from the prescriptions of such texts. The indisputable fact remains, however, that the patrilineal and patrilocal Confucian family is incorrigibly patriarchal. The primary focus of the Chinese family was always on the men and their patrilineal ancestors and descendants. Although the degree of Confucian patriarchal oppression may have fluctuated over time, as Chen and Raffles argue, the wife's status was that of a stranger brought in from the outside at an early age, barely over puberty, to be incorporated into the patrilineal family to occupy a subordinate and subservient role. Her function was to be a helpmate to the son to carry out his Confucian duties towards his ancestors by producing a male heir and assisting him in elaborate rituals of his ancestor worship, mourning, and funerals. And I asked then, is the patrilineal and patrilocal Confucian family intrinsically connected to the Confucian philosophical system? I argue that it is not. It was the family system of the Zhou royalty in Chinese antiquity that became the basis for the Zhou rites for ancestor worship, mourning, and funerals. Kongzi, who considered the Zhou the golden age, wholeheartedly, and I might add, uncritically, accepted it. Neither the cardinal Confucian virtues nor the Confucian ideal of the Junzi are necessarily or conceptually connected to the traditional Confucian family, except contingently through Li of ancient China. Since Kongzi enthusiastically endorsed the Zhou rites, the traditional Confucian family became part of Confucianism and came to be universally accepted, including by women in pre-modern East Asia. The patrilineal and patrilocal Confucian family complicated for women even their filial piety, which is the only Confucian virtue that they share with male counterparts. Affection is the parent-child relation. In the parent-child relation is the basis for filial piety. The recipients of this duty for women, however, were not their native parents, but rather the parents-in-law of the patrilineal family into which they were married. Naturally, the in-laws were not likely to feel love and affection towards the daughter-in-law, and the young wife was not likely to feel natural affection for the in-laws to sufficiently ground their sense of filial piety. Furthermore, the circumstances of the young daughter-in-law, who was isolated and vulnerable, were a situation ripe for abuse. And there is ample evidence, both historical and anecdotal, that the family members, including the husband, were often quite abusive towards the newest member of the family. Hence, filial piety for the wife was doubly problematic. First, she had to show filial piety towards parents-in-law who did not raise her with love and care. Second, they tended to be abusive towards her in treating her as a quasi-servant confined to the inner quarters, isolated from those who cared for her. I suspect that the realities of daughters-in-law may have led to the emphasis on women's virtues, such as obedience, compliance, passivity, submissiveness, docility, subservience, gentleness, or quietude, so that the wife would persevere any abuse she experienced at the new home and still serve husband and in-laws with obedience and compliance. In other words, women's virtues were necessary to maintain the traditional conception of the Confucian family as patrilineal and patrilocal. They were ideological. So the last section is defending my own conception of Confucian feminism. The fact that I call those who embraced women's virtues feminist may seem counterintuitive to modern feminists, and this may seem to compromise my Confucian feminism. I argue, however, that this does not invalidate their Confucian feminism. The reason is that even impeccable moral agents are inherently cultural beings who cannot transcend their social circumstances in their reasoning, no matter how excellent their reasoning capacities. Being inherently cultural beings, which we all are, means that they would not be able to reject ideas, customs, or institutions universally accepted by their contemporaries. The traditional Confucian family was such an institution, and women's virtues were such ideas. Li Zhe, even though he may not have rejected women's virtues, at least rejected the notion that women are inferior by nature. While he was truly exceptional, he paid a heavy price for it because his ideas were too ahead of his time. They were misunderstood and impugned, ultimately leading to his downfall. Feminism, I believe, should not require a genius mind, such as that of Li Zhe. Rather, it should be for everyone with normal human capacities. Hence, subscribing to universally accepted ideas of one's time and space, such as women's virtues, should be compatible with feminism. However, my Confucian feminism makes room for the content of gender equality to evolve by accommodating changes in feminist sensibilities over time. This is because it accepts the premise that culture is inherently dynamic, malleable, resilient, and self-correctable through internal mechanisms. Confucian gender equality as equality between women and men in their moral potential to approximate the Confucian moral ideal of the Junzi is still relatively abstract and allows for different interpretations. As we have seen, the pre-modern interpretation of Confucian gender equality included women's virtues because of the universal acceptance of the traditional Confucian family in pre-modern East Asia. Yet, the traditional Confucian family is not constitutive of the Confucian philosophical system, as I have argued. And the idea of Confucian gender equality can entail different interpretations, some of which may reject the traditional Confucian family. Suppose there are two configurations of Confucian gender equality, CGE 1 and CGE 2, with different interpretations depending on social, political, and economic circumstances. This is going to get a little bit more complicated to hear this because It's easier to see the point if you look at a diagram, but I won't be able to show you, so please bear with me. Here are different scenarios pertaining to a specific time frame, let's say 30 years. The first scenario is CGE1 and CGE2 may be equally influential. Or in the second scenario, CGE1 may be dominant, or in scenario 3, CGE2 may be dominant, or in scenario 4, the situation might be more complicated because of multiple interpretations, CGE1 through CGEN, vying for dominance among the populace. The diversity of interpretations regarding Confucian gender equality may be synchronic or diachronic. To simplify the example, let us focus on a single dominant interpretation pertaining to the pre-modern era that endorsed women's virtues and call it CGE pre-modern. While this interpretation may have been universally accepted under the social, political, and economic circumstances of a pre-modern Confucian polity, its inadequacy may be hard to ignore in the contemporary context due to either changes in socio-political economic circumstances or people's increasing awareness of conceptual and logical problems that CGE pre-modern entails, or it could be both. Hence, it is possible that a different interpretation of Confucian gender equality, CGE contemporary, may be called for in the Confucian context. And in fact, this is what I'm going to argue in the next chapter. Anyway, my conception of Confucian feminism is reflexive and dynamic in allowing the evolution of people's awareness, reflecting changes in socio-cultural circumstances and expansion of people's self-awareness to bring about changes in the content of Confucian gender equality. In sum, that my Confucian feminism's ability to accommodate women's virtues in pre-modern contexts is a strength of my position rather than a liability, as it is realistic about human abilities as inherently cultural beings, and yet is able to show how feminist consciousness can evolve over time. So thank you very much for your attention. We can't hear you, Wendy. We can't hear you. You're muted.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for this. I always forget this. Thank you very much, Professor, for your insightful talk. We're happy to have 3 commentators with us today. Now I'm going to introduce our first commentator, Professor Minjun You. Thank you for coming. Dr. Minjun You is an associate professor at the Korean Studies Institute School of History, Zhejiang University. Holding a PhD in literature, Dr. Yu previously worked as a super postdoctoral fellow at School of Philosophy at Fudan University and as an editorial officer for Toji Studies. Her research focuses on East Asian Confucianism, classical literary theory, and pre-modern intellectual history. She has published 1 monograph, Rhetoric in the Confucian Classics, Epistemology of the Classic in 3 East Asian countries. Currently, she is working on a project which examines Chinese, Korean, and Japanese intellectuals' interpretations of benevolence Ren in the analogues during the 17th to 19th century. Dr. Yu has conducted field research at institutions like Peking University, specializing in multilingual studies of East Asian intellectual traditions, proficient in Korean, English, literary Sinitic, and Mandarin Chinese. Her work bridges philosophical, historical, and literary scholarship across cultures. So, Professor Yu, the floor is all yours now.
Thank you for the wonderful talk for Professor Herr, and thank you for having me here for Professor Paul. And then I'm not studying Confucian feminism, but as a female scholar, so I think I have to pay attention and actually this concept, right? Confucian feminism. And then I do agree with the moral equality, the concept, and then the very 怎么说呢？very systemical. And then I'm also looking forward to reading and having your monograph, future monograph. And then I have a kind of a small question about your talk. And the first question is related with you select 4 scholars, such as 2 scholars from China and the 2 scholars, female scholar from South Korea, maybe Joseon Dynasty. And then there is kind of a time difference between them. For instance, Ming Dynasty scholar is kind of 14th to 15th century, but Joseon Dynasty scholar is 18th century, around the 19th century. So I think there is kinds of time difference between maybe 2 countries and the 4 scholars. And then I would like to know why you select these 4 scholars as kinds of example or Confucian theories of feminism. And also there is other scholar, female scholars, Confucian scholar in Qing Dynasty. So I'd like to ask you why you select, and then how you would like to deal with these kinds of time differences. Because in Joseon Dynasty, because early Joseon Dynasty and the late Joseon Dynasty also feminism or Confucian rituals on feminism is also a little bit very different. So I would like to ask you how to deal with or how to like to do it, work on these 4 scholars difference, time difference, and also kinds of a country different, national differences. Also kinds of they also have a Li Zhi, Ming Dynasty scholar is also a not. He is not a female, he's a male. So I would like to ask you about female scholars on Confucian feminism and the male scholars on Confucian feminism. There is also kinds of different approach or different concept might have or might don't have. So I would like to hear about your opinion. And then the other question is that I think that in the introduction is Junzi Kunja is kind of a main concept in your work, but I also have kinds of a little curiosity that in the Confucianism also they think that females can be a Junzi or not. So it will be a kind of a critical issue in, I think, Confucian female feminism. And then the third question, the last question is that I also read about a little bit on Confucian feminism, but I also kind of a skeptical on Confucian feminism or this kinds of theory or this kinds of stuff. So I would like to ask you, it's kinds of your work is kinds of a theoretical work or theorizing work, but in the practical or such as a Joseon Dynasty, actually in practical or ritual ways, the female was not that much considered as a really whole human origins or a kinds of a equal human as a male. So I would like to ask you about, or it would be these kinds of Confucian families will be able to employ to not to the past into these prisons, right? Because actually it will be possible be able to apply these concept or Confucian families on this present 21st century. So this kinds of questions that I have. Yeah, thank you for your talk.
Okay.
Should I respond?
Yeah, you can respond now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your thoughtful commentary or comments, Dr. Yu. And it's a pleasure to meet you for the very first time. So, so first of all, I think my discipline is very relevant to what I'm doing. I'm a philosopher, and philosophers engage in these kind of like abstract thinking. They offer theories. And so regarding your first question, how did I choose these four Confucian theorists? Is that And so if you can find that idea in their theory or their theorizing, then I would think of them as Confucian feminists. And so the reason why I chose those four people is simple. And they all of them I think accept the idea of Confucian gender equality. Regardless of how different their theories are and how far apart they are in time and space. And you kind of in passing mentioned a Qing scholar. I mean, did she write anything about gender equality? If she did, I would very much like to know. I mean, the more Confucian feminists, in my sense, there are, the better it is. And so I don't know if that answers your first question, but regarding your second question, can a woman be a junzi? Right. I mean, that is a very important question to me. And I think as a, if you accept my conception of Confucian feminism, yes, a woman can be a junzi, right? And this may sound, I don't know, a little bit, how can I say, for those people who are like really immersed in the traditional theories of Junzi and Confucianism, this may sound really strange because nobody ever said that, well, except these four theorists that I've mentioned, nobody really talks about a woman being a Junzi. However, again, because I'm a philosopher and I have offered a philosophical theory about what Confucian feminism should be, I'm arguing that according to my theory, that women can be Junzi, So that would be my answer to your second question. I wasn't quite clear on your third question. If you don't mind repeating what you said, I would be happy to try to answer that.
My third question is that the Confucian feminism was, I think, it's kind of a past practice, can be applied to the past or can be applied to this present.
Okay.
My question is that actually I'm very skeptical to Confucian feminism in Joseon Dynasty, actually. So I think there was not so much Confucian feminism during the Joseon Dynasty. But if we develop this concept as a new concept or in this present, if this concept will be able to applicable to this present, not to the past. I mean,
yes. Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
yeah.
Yes, of course. When I try to think of, a theory of Confucian feminism, my aim is that it will apply to the future, not necessarily to the past. I mean, basically what I was intending to do is, try to show that Confucianism is capable of being compatible with feminism. And I may say this again when I'm responding to the other two guests, because they have sent me their questions in advance. So, I have thought about this. But the motivation for coming up with Confucian feminism for me was to really respond to Western feminists, because Western feminists would argue that any traditional theory, Confucianism, Buddhism, or whatever, right? They are very much opposed to thinking of those philosophies as compatible with feminism, because they define feminism in a certain way. For them, the most important thing that is necessary for a person to be a feminist is that they have to be autonomous. And the idea of autonomy is incompatible with traditional philosophies. So my main motivation was to really kind of rebut them, to kind of try to show them, no, Confucianism can be feminist. And so I was kind of digging around to see, if there are people who advocated Confucian gender equality. And I feel very fortunate that I was able to find some people here. But so yeah, I mean, it's not that, even though I may have this conception of Confucian feminism, of course, it was just, a few people, maybe, one person here, one person there, who had the germs of Confucian feminism. But of course, the society was not ready for that. I mean, that really didn't take off at all. So I'm looking into the future so that my position on Confucian feminism would be applicable. Yeah.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you.
So now let's move on to, thanks. Okay. So now let's move on to our next commentator, Professor Xi Chen. Dr. Xi Chen is a professor at the Philosophy Department, University of Vermont, USA. Her research interests cover ancient Confucianism, comparative philosophy, gender, and the philosophy of emotion. Professor Chen, thank you for being here. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Professor Herr, for a very interesting, well-argued, and very thoughtful paper. I agree with many, many ideas in your paper. So I just want to raise two questions to, want to talk about them a little bit more with you. Not necessarily that I disagree with you, but just want to, further pursue those ideas. So the first is about the idea of moral equality. So I think for feminism, what is more important is the social and political equality rather than moral equality, because, of course, feminism is to strive for all kinds of equality. But it seems like it is the social and political inequality that restricts them more than moral equality. So I can see why you think that moral equality is important, and I can see why moral equality can serve as a basis for the social and political equality, which I think you aims to do in your paper by appealing to the idea of recognition, respect, and say how moral equality can grant the recognition, respect. But on the other hand, I also think that moral equality in itself does not logically imply social and political equality. So one reason for thinking that is to point to the argument given by Professor Chen Yang Li, right? He's saying that, of course, he also agrees with you that men and women are born with equal moral potential. So in that sense, he agrees with you that there is a kind of moral equality in that sense. But he also emphasized other aspects of moral equality in a sense. If he focus on equality in the sense of giving equal weight to relevant equal features, then he can also say that equal moral equality might mean not so much about equal moral potential, but equal moral accomplishment. So if we are talking about equal moral accomplishment, then especially in the context of ancient Confucianism, then men in general, because of the position, because of education and everything, they have more moral accomplishment. So therefore, that grounds the social and political equality. So if that is the case, then we can see that just by appealing to moral potential might not be enough to ground the social and political equality, which I think your paper also aimed to establish. And the second question I have is about whether, I think that is the question you yourself have raised, about whether we can call those women that you pointed to who advocated female virtues, which seems to be some kind of, sexist virtues that place women in a lower class status, right? Those kind of virtues like subservience, witness, obedience, things like that. So I think it's quite obvious that those kind of virtues really are not virtues for equality, right? So the question here is, for women who advocate those virtues, can they be called feminists? My position on that is like, seems like if they also advocate other things that point to gender equality, then they can be called feminists. But feminists can also fail in other aspects in relation to some other feminist ideas. So therefore, there might be certain aspects in which they fail to be feminists. So whether someone can be called a feminist or not, I think maybe we just need to be a little bit, maybe more nuanced in saying that in this aspect, those people are feminists. In those aspects, maybe they fail as being feminists. So these are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shini. And yes, so, the first question, I have no disagreement about, the notion that the moral equality does not necessarily lead to social and political equality. And I think I did talk about that in the paper. And so, I mean, the dispute between Chen-Yang Li and me, at least regarding the papers that I've been referring in my paper, it is not about that. I totally agree with him that, yes, there is moral equality in Confucianism, but it ultimately ends up supporting social or political inequality because, morally superior beings have the authority over other people, right? So I agree with that. So the debate between he and I suppose, would be characterized as, so how central is the idea of moral equality? There are passages in his work where, because there is an emphasis upon social and political hierarchy in Confucianism, that moral equality is kind of like, left on the wayside, and that's what I was actually trying to argue against. Despite the fact that Confucianism emphasizes social and political hierarchy, that has to be justified by moral equality. So that's basically my position. And you don't have to agree with me, and perhaps we could talk more about this in the future. But okay, so since we're kind of running out of time, so the second one, I think I've mentioned my motivation in thinking about a theory of Confucian feminism. And basically, the conversation that I had in mind was more between me and just regular feminists, right? I really wanted to show that Western feminists are wrong in thinking that Confucianism or other traditional philosophies are incompatible with, you know, uh, women's rights or, feminism. And so, of course, I agree with you that these four Confucian feminists that I have identified, their position on Confucian feminism is very imperfect, right? I mean, for example, because they accepted women's virtues, which are really, truly ideological. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I still wanted to say that, yeah, despite that, we can't be perfect all the time, but we cannot deny the fact that their position is Confucian feminism. So, again, this requires a lot more conversation between you and me and maybe other people as well, but I think I'll just leave it here. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Xi Chen. Now let's move on to our last commentator today. We're very honored to have Professor Stephen Angle as our last commentator. Dr. Stephen Angle is Mansfield Freeman Professor of East Asian Studies and Professor of Philosophy at Wesleyan University. Professor Angle specializes in Confucianism and comparative philosophy, and his research focuses on philosophy's role in human rights, politics, and ethics both in East Asia and globally. Professor Angle is the author of 5 books and co-editor of 2 others, including Growing Moral: A Confucian Guide to Life, published by Oxford in 2022, and Progressive Confucianism and Its Critics, Dialogues from the Confucian Heartland, which is co-edited with Yu Tangjin, published by Routledge in 2025. Professor Angle, the floor is all yours now.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you everybody for a really fascinating discussion. Thank you most of all to Ranjoo for this whole project that you're working on, which is really inspirational. So I know don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to be really brief. I want to sort of applaud the decolonial approach that Ranjoo was just talking about, and trying to insist that feminism can mean multiple things, and just briefly make 3 points, 3 suggestions really. The first one is to suggest that the husband-wife relationship is maybe able to make the traditional Confucian perspective more complicated than Ranjoo presented, and I'm thinking in particular of the ways in which Jushi talks about the husband-wife relationship, not just as about children, but as about an opportunity for mutual moral growth. He says at one point that the way of the Junzi begins its rise in the confidential moments between husband and wife. So I think that there's a sort of recognition there of a role that wives play vis-a-vis husbands and vice versa, in sort of mutual betterment. I think it's completely compatible with what you say, but just kind of brings out another dimension that might be nice. Secondly, with respect to the Confucian family, so I think a lot of what you say is really insightful, and it does undergird much of what we see in the pre-modern world. But and maybe there's a way in which we can take um, uh, Professor Yo's comments about the different times and places, early Joseon, late Joseon, and so on, and go even a little further with that. Because there were a lot of important ritual innovations and changes that take place over time. The family isn't just a static thing. And I've been impressed, for example, with Hua Wang's on gender-related rituals in Joseon, Korea. And so I think it's just maybe a way to nuance a little bit more of what you're saying without really challenging the underlying picture. So lastly, about women's virtues. So in the paper that you gave us in advance, there's a long footnote talking about this notion of a burdened virtue that comes from Lisa Tessman and that I've written about in the context of pre-modern Confucian notions of gender. And I guess I just want to kind of push back a little bit on that footnote and to say, I mean, the way you put it in your talk this evening was that the the realities of life as a daughter-in-law is what led to the conception of women's virtues. And that seems to me to be exactly how you get a burden virtue. On Tessman's definition, a burden virtue is a trait that is valuable to have in a given context, but which you wouldn't want to have if it weren't for the oppressive situation that you were in. So it seems to me that that's exactly what a burden virtue is. And so I don't think that burden virtues are necessary, women's virtues are necessary for a traditional family. I think they're necessary for women's self-defense, given the nature of the traditional family. But you could have a traditional family and just give up on that self-defense idea. So this is just another way, and this is, I think, keeping with the other two commentators of saying, um, yeah, let's embrace multiple kinds of feminism, but let's find a way to still speak critically about the shortcomings of those feminisms. I think we can do that without just embracing a one-size-fits-all Western feminism as the ideal. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Steve. With your comments, with the exception of the third one, I have no disagreement with you. I think I do. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm not really like a Confucian scholar who's been just working on Confucianism, so I do lack the kind of expertise on, let's say, what Jushi might have said about the husband and wife relationship. I would definitely like to get some source from you. If you have the source where he discusses those, I would like to access those. So yeah, definitely, it's because of my ignorance and my limitations. But of course, this is the reason why it's good to have people like you give comments, right? So thank you for that. As well as the second one is kind of like similar to the first one. So all like thank you very much. I welcome all of that. Now, the third one, I think we need more time to discuss. I think, this is, I think, more about like interpreting Tessman. I thought she gave multiple definitions of burden virtues, especially, in the conclusion. And so I had some issues with that, but certainly we can continue our conversation and, decide what is the right way to interpret her. But thank you so much.
Now we can open the floor for the audience. Any question is welcome. Professor, can I have a question? Maybe it's a question. Learning from based on the lecture you gave today and the comments given by the professors, it just occurred to me that Professor Chen said that the social political equality is more important than moral equality for for the feminist ideal to be realized, since we need to grasp the power to have these responsibilities and capabilities realized, accomplished, and also Professor Stephen Engel said that maybe the Western feminist ideal is not perfect. Maybe we can use some Confucian ideas to complement certain Western feminist defect. Maybe the submission, the term submission, and may not be conceived as a virtue burden if we only take it as a strategy to make our own goals realized. In this sense, maybe we only use it as a strategy instead of a like we should morally submissive, really, like wholeheartedly, so that we can give submission and other ideas positive meanings that those Western feminism may think is a very negative meanings, so that maybe the Confucianism may in another way around contribute to these feminist Western feminist thinkings. Yeah, it's I just yeah I just have these ideas when hearing of your talks. Yeah.
So
So
was that comment to me
yeah.
or um
So I'm kind of thinking, if there can be a way that those Western, like the ideas like submission and other terms, which is taken as which is taken by the Western philosophers as passive, women virtues can be interpreted as positive modes of behaving by through adopting Confucian notions. Yeah, I have this question for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. So what I'm thinking is I'm kind of like taking a broader view about how feminism can be compatible with Confucianism. And I mean, I kind of share the view of Shinny and, with Steve as well about, women's virtues being problematic, like, burdened, as Steve was saying. So again, because I'm thinking about how Confucian feminism can evolve in the future. What I'm saying is, the problematic women's virtues could be dropped as we move forward to the future. If you understand. So I'm not necessarily saying that we should maintain women's virtues because they are problematic.
Yeah.
But while, for the pre-modern theorists, we can categorize them as Confucian feminists, despite the fact that they subscribed to women's virtues. I'm kind of hoping that Confucian feminism would evolve in the future and kind of drop those problematic virtues in the future. Does that kind of make sense? So that
Yeah.
would be my view, but
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you a
yeah,
lot.
thank you.
Yeah. I think time is off. So, and there are still now there are someone who are asking for asking questions. So shall we have it or um?
Yeah. Why don't we quickly take one question?
Okay. So Wang Mei, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, Professor here. It's a great honor to have a presentation here, and I don't know, not from your views about the gender equality, uh, I'm wondering, your topic is about gender equality. Can you explain to us more about the relation between moral equality in Confucianism and the Confucian gender equality? Or what do you think of the causation or the relation between the two? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so to me, I think, people can disagree with me on this, but the reason why I devoted so much time to, Confucian moral equality is because I thought that is the basis on which to build Confucian gender equality. And the way that I define Confucian moral equality is, equality among all Confucian persons as having the equal potential to be a junzi, right? And so, whether you are the son of a butcher or whether you're the son of a politician, the potential to be a junzi is equal, right? Of course, in the end, depending on your efforts or other things, you may end up in different situation in the end. However, the equal moral potential is basically what grounds the Confucian moral equality. And so basically, if that's the case, I interpret gender equality, Confucian gender equality, as equality between men and women to self-cultivate and approximate the ideal of junzi, right? So I think, it is based, it's a derivative of the idea of Confucian moral equality, except that its emphasis is on the equality between the sexes or the genders, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think time is up. We shall conclude the session now. Thanks, Professor Ranjoo, for your insightful talk and the insightful comments given by the commentators today. And thank you for the question from Wang Mei. Yeah, and thanks, Professor Paul. Now